the essential reports, and get you well underway in a firm foundation of analytics so that you can know your digital customers. So you may be wondering why there are two very similar but not quite identical versions of this course in the library. Well, we're in a transitional time in the Google Analytics world. We have a brand new version called Google Analytics 4, or GA4 for short. But we still have the older version of GA that's been out for a while, not called GA3, but rather Universal Analytics. So if we're taking the time to learn with a new course, shouldn't we just focus on the new one? Well, that depends. There are millions of installations of Universal Analytics out there, and some of you may be trying to learn how to use your existing installed version, so we have a course that covers those millions of installations. But because Google has said that as of July 1st, 2023, they will no longer process data sent from Universal Analytics, you need to be thinking about this course because the time to think about that and plan for that switch is now. In fact, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can take advantage of both versions in the next chapter, but for now, I just wanted to clear up why both versions exist and make sure you know that this course is all about the new Google Analytics 4. So what do we mean by digital analytics? Well, analytics is all about measuring your business goals, understanding your performance, and finding ways to optimize and improve that performance. And the critical part here is the continuous improvement. After all, we're not here to just look at pretty pie charts for the sake of fancy reports. We want to actually do something about it. So digital analytics is also a process. We first perform the measurement, for we can't manage what we can't measure, and then we apply the analysis, we learn from what we see, and then we take action. Now, before we jump right into the Google Analytics tool, it's important that we first go over some key definitions, as I firmly believe that knowing the vocabulary is half the battle of learning any new subject. Understanding these concepts is going to give you a head start in knowing how to manipulate and interpret the data available, not just in Google Analytics, but really any analytics tool. So the first two concepts you're going to be hearing about a lot in this course are metrics and dimensions. These two variables make up all of the data populated in the analytics reports. Now, metrics are the quantitative numbers that are measuring data in counts, ratios, percentages, and so on. Dimensions are the qualitative categories that describe the data in segments or breakouts. So, for example, in this particular table, the dimensions are the countries that describe the data segments, and the metric is the count, in this case, the number of visitors. Now, when we think about digital analytics, we're measuring the interactions, the engagements between us and the consumer, the person who's visiting our site or our mobile application or whatever digital experience we're providing. And the most basic unit of that measurement in Google Analytics is the event. As marketers, we may think of events as things you attend, a webinar or a product launch. That's not at all what we're talking about here. Here, an event just refers to any one interaction. For example, if you click on a link, you scroll a page, you zoom into a product, or even if you just load a page, those are all types of events. It can also be more complex interactions, like completing an e-commerce transaction or submitting a form, or even when our site has an error and something goes wrong, called an exception. All of those interactions can be sent back to Google as events, and the type of event is described as a parameter to that event. We'll go into this a bit more detail later, but since events are the backbone of how this all works, I want to point out their structure. So each event has a name. As you see here, we have a bunch of page view events and then a scroll event at the bottom. Inside of each of these page view events, we have several parameters. These are going to provide more details about those events, such as the page location, which is just the URL, or the page title, or even the screen resolution. All the way at the bottom for the scroll event, we have the time in milliseconds to get to that bottom scroll point. And lastly, we have the actual value that is going to be recorded for that event parameter. So for the page location parameters that are part of the page view events, we have the URL. For the value of the resolution parameter, that's part of the page view event, we have 1920 by 1200. Again, we're going to see a bit more of this later. I just want to introduce the idea that almost all of the data sent back to Google Analytics is going to follow this event, parameter, and value model. Now, we can group together all of the events in a given time frame, and we're going to call that collection a session. Here in GA, a session is the collection of interactions that are taking place between when a visitor enters your site or your app and when they exit. And we used to call this a website visit, but now that we can include apps as well, a session is really the more accurate term. We define an exit by when you let your browser or app go dormant for 30 minutes or if you exit out entirely. However, if a user leaves your site, but they keep browsing and then they return back to your site within 30 minutes, they're actually still counted as part of that original session because it hasn't been 30 minutes and they haven't closed the browser. Now, next, we have this idea of the user. Now, these are the people who are visiting your site. In Google Analytics, each event and session is going to be associated back to a user. Google has 3 ways that they're going to identify a single user. Either the cookies on the browser, if they have really nothing else to go on. The next best up is if you've logged into their service, so via Gmail, Android, Google Docs, some way that Google can identify you. Lastly, and probably most specific, is that we can provide a specific ID to Google, so usually from a login on our own site if we have one. Now, ideally, this allows us to be able to track a single user with those multiple sessions, even if those are on different devices, like a phone, a laptop, and a tablet. Now, a group of users who all share a similar dimension or fall under a similar category can make up a segment. Segments can be divided by things like physical location, the type of device that's being used, the traffic source the user is coming from. Basically, any way that we can differentiate those users, we can create a segment for that. Now, this is a really important concept to understand, so we're going to discuss this in a dedicated video later in the chapter. I mentioned before about how analytics is all about measuring your business objectives. When a user completes an action that you wanted them to take, any action you want to define as a success, we're going to call that a conversion. We define these conversions through goals in analytics so that we can identify and record when this conversion takes place. Now, it could be completing a purchase, but also just clicking on a particular link or downloading a document or completing a very specific form I want to track, or even just spending a certain amount of time on the site. You get to decide what you're calling a conversion, and we're going to use these conversions to measure which of the users have successful visits, then analyze how they got to the site, what content they saw, and other things that can help us better understand our converting customers. Now, speaking of tracking the source of that traffic, the 2 most important things we track there are called the source and the medium. The source is where the user traffic originated from, and the media is the avenue that the traffic took to get from the source to your site. For example, let's say a user was scrolling through Twitter and clicked on a post that linked to your site. The source of the traffic would be Twitter. That's the who, and the medium they took was the social. That's the how. We want to see which sources and mediums are sending us the best, most converting traffic. And the overall process of assigning that credit to sources when this conversions happen is called attribution, as we are attributing those conversions to those sources. Now, often that customer journey from start to conversion can involve several sources and several sessions and various content pieces on your site. And proper attribution analysis will tell us which of those touch points along the way was having the greatest influence on a successful outcome. This is a really important topic to consider, and although we won't be going into a ton of detail here in this course, we do have another course that is specifically about attribution and media mix model, and it covers it in full detail. And we went over these terms a bit quickly, but don't worry, we'll discuss them all in more detail, and you can always refer back to this video for reference. Google Analytics 4 is the new, completely from the ground up rewrite of the world's most popular digital analytics package. Years in the making, there's a completely new data model, a new interface, and a ton of new functionality. So one question is the name. Was there a Google Analytics 3? Well, originally there was Urchin. Urchin was the company that Google bought. That was Urchin.js, and believe it or not, that still works if you send that data back to Google. They came out with Google Analytics, and this ran off of a JavaScript called ga.js, you may remember. Then we launched Universal Analytics, which was running on analytics.js, and then later this gtag.js. And now we have Google Analytics 4, which also runs on the gtag.js. So this is the 4th iteration, and it brings a lot of changes and upgrades. Number 1, it is completely event-driven. It is a total from the bottom-up rewrite of the data model, and it's more based on Firebase, but everything is event-driven now, which provides a lot of advantages that we'll go through. It also comes with automatic tracking, something called enhanced measurement, and this is really handy. It automates a whole bunch of things that you used to have to do by hand that were quite difficult. So things like scrolling down a page is now automatically tracked. Outbound clicks to other sites, site search where people search for things on your site itself, video engagements, video starts, video progress, video complete, file downloads, and people are downloading PDFs and so on. That's all automatically tracked. We also have cross-device tracking. It uses Google Signals to understand when someone is using a mobile device and, say, a laptop or a computer, and that is a single person. So it no longer breaks that and treats it as two different people. So not only is it more accurate, but you get the insights that you understand when people are using different devices. They've recalculated the way that sessions are done. It no longer breaks a session as it goes past midnight. The things that would make it look like a person had two different sessions when they actually only have one. They've vastly improved the funnels and the pathing. We'll go through all that, but it is much more extensible and intuitive and better represents what's happening on your site. The ability to do time-based analysis to understand how long it takes between events that are happening. There's also additional more flexible conversion goals that can be set up to more accurately track what's happening on your site or app. And advanced users can export all the data to the cloud via BigQuery, something that was previously only available in the enterprise version. And we won't get too far into that in this beginner's course, but it's worth saying that is a pretty cool upgrade. So I'm really excited to show you all this new functionality. Let's dive in. So this video is probably wrong. Hopefully just a little bit, and in a good way, but features are being added so frequently that even though we update this video, literally by the time I publish, they may have added a few more things. I hope that by now you'll agree there's some pretty great updates in this new version of Google Analytics. But for those of you who are coming from the previous version of GA, you might rely on a few things that aren't quite in the product yet. So I want to make sure you're well aware of what is and what isn't in GA4 at this point. We can think about feature parity compared to the previous version in a couple of ways. In many cases, you can accomplish the same outcome, just in a different way. If that's the case, they may never develop the feature because you answered the same question using the new UI or data model. Views, for example, they're never coming back. But I think in most cases, we can accomplish the same thing with some existing and a few upcoming features. Now, in other cases, they just haven't gotten there. And while I can't share the full roadmap, trust me when I say it is pretty exhaustive and it has some great features and integrations on the way. Many of them are either things that weren't possible before or were only possible in the paid enterprise version that are now going to be free. As always, if you have specific questions on a feature, if it's ready, almost ready, feel free to reach out and I will see if I can shed any light. The first one, attribution. Attribution is getting a major overhaul. It's almost, but not quite ready for release. If your workflow is heavily using attribution, then you're going to need to rely on Universal just a little bit longer. The next is multi-channel funnels. Same thing, not quite complete. Things like referral exclusion list are still in process. That's the stream level user permissions and filters. So views are gone, but we do have data streams and sub-properties. And there's some ways that we can modify the stream, but it's not quite the same or in some cases as easy as the old view filters were. Things like lowercase filters, referral parameter exclusions aren't there yet. We're holding out hope as those were really great for governance and data hygiene. Also, page and site time load tools. These built-in tools that kind of gave us information around how our page was loading, performance analysis, they're not yet included. Integration with the full GMP tool suite. We do have integration with DV360, with Search Console, with Data Studio, but some of the others, SA360, Campaign Manager, and so on, are still being built out. Now, the rest, they're coming. They're going to be more capable. They're going to be more accessible in the free version, which I think should be a big upgrade and worth the wait. And lastly, e-commerce features and funnels. These more detailed, specific features, such as the product scope dimensions and metrics, as well as pre-built funnels, they're not available in Google Analytics 4 yet, but obviously these are important features and coming. So for this reason, we generally advise that GA4 is not 100% ready to replace certain types of fully built out Universal Analytics implementations, especially if you are a heavy user of the features above. So what should you do? Stick with Universal? No, probably not, but we'll address that in the next video. So which version should I choose? Well, there are a couple ways to think about that. First question is, are you starting from scratch? Are you here to learn about how to install Google Analytics on a brand new site with a brand new account? Then Google Analytics 4 is likely the answer. And this is because they are shutting off the old version next summer. Right now it's planned for July 2023. And I'd say the only exception to this advice is if you need a feature that doesn't quite exist yet. I covered those missing features in the previous video, so take a look at that. But as we touched on earlier, there are millions of existing accounts out there. So if you're here to learn how to use your already installed analytics, you may want to have a working knowledge of that platform too as you plan your transition, and we have a course for that as well. Now, one thing that is very important to understand is that this isn't like most software where you have a standard upgrade path where you move your data over to a new version and you simply start using that one instead. There is no way to port over previous data. You are starting from scratch with GA4, whether this is your first day on an account or whether you've been running Google Analytics for years. And of course, an account that has no data in it isn't very useful for analysis, so you've got to start building up data in your account. And the best time to start that was the day the beta launched a long time ago. The second best time is today. Now, it's also worth mentioning that if you do have an existing installation and you want to get your feet wet with the new version, even if you're running the paid version of Google Analytics, you will never be charged twice for putting data in both because they want you to start using the new one and prep for the shutoff. So you might as well take advantage of that and run them both simultaneously. You may be collecting data in your existing account, and starting today, if you add GA4, even if you don't touch it, you just let it run. Meanwhile, Google's going to be adding features, and at some point, it is going to be by far the more capable tool, and at some point, it'll be the only tool. So when in doubt, it's probably best to go with Google Analytics 4. And if you still aren't clear, drop me a line. I'm happy to help guide you. Now, whether you already have an older Universal Analytics account or you're starting from scratch, we're going to need to set up a new Google Analytics 4 account. I'm going to show you how to kick it off both ways, from scratch or if you already have an account. Now, in both cases, we're just going to head over here to analytics.google.com. You're going to have to sign in if you need to. And now remember, this doesn't have to be a Gmail. And in fact, for work accounts, we often recommend that it's not. Any Google account will work. And if it looks like this, it's because you're starting from scratch with a brand new account. Now, if you come over here, we can show you all the different products that is part of the Google Marketing Platform, of which Analytics is one. And so we see we have Analytics. We also have Tag Manager down here, which is an important part of this. And we have an entire course on Tag Manager. But the purpose here we're going to look at is Analytics. So we're going to come back here and click on Start Measuring. And it's going to send us here to this screen where we're going to start the account setup. Now, I'm going to pause for a moment, and I'm going to catch the other folks up to this point as well. So if you log into analytics.google.com and it looks like this, it's because you already have an account set up. So what we're going to do is head on down here to the admin. And we're going to create a brand new account here. Remember, you've already got an account here. This is your older one. We're going to create a Google Analytics 4 account. So we're caught up to that same spot here. We're going to enter in an account name. So we're going to go with GA4 account demo. Down here we have our account data sharing settings, and you want to have a read through these, figure out which ones you like to choose. I'm going to go ahead and just leave those as a default for now. The next thing we have to do is look at our property setup. Now, unlike Universal Analytics, Google Analytics 4 allows you to put both web and app data into the same property here. So this property name should encompass what you plan to put in there. In our case, we're just going to put the web data. So I'm just going to call this the website to keep that clear for myself. Set what time zone you want your reporting time to be in, your currency, and then head down to next. It's going to ask you a little bit about your business. Don't worry too much about these. We're going to show you how to configure all of this. So just go ahead and put in whatever describes you the best. And click Create. Okay, it's going to ask us about our terms of service. Go ahead and have a read through these and accept. Now, the next thing we have to do here is set up our data stream to start collecting. Remember, you can send data from an iOS app, an Android app, or a website into this property. For the purposes of this course, we're just going to be focused on the web. So we're going to go ahead and put that in here. And again, it's going to ask us for what website we're sending that in. And then I'm just going to put in here that this is the web stream. And then it's going to ask you about enhanced measurement. This is where we can automatically measure certain types of interactions on the page. We can measure scrolls, outbound clicks, site search, video engagement, certain types of file downloads. And I do recommend that you leave this on. We're going to have an entire video that dives into this a bit more, but for now we want to go ahead and enable that by default. And we're going to click Create Stream to create this stream that's going to populate data. From here, we're going to get this summary page. Important things here, we have our stream name, we have our measurement ID. Up here, we have the fact that enhanced measurement was turned on. And down here, we're going to have some tagging instructions that are going to show us how we're going to actually go get this onto our site and tag up our pages. Now, we're going to dive into that in depth in just a few videos here and tell you exactly what to do. But for now, you've made it to this screen, so know that you have successfully created a Google Analytics 4 account, and we are ready to start implementing this on your site. There are a few different ways to install Google Analytics 4, depending on where you're starting from. Now, we'll assume that you do have an account, either existing or brand new, as we showed in the prior video, but from there, we can go in 3 different directions. First is that you might want to use Google Tag Manager. And in fact, for many people, I recommend that way. If you're sure that's you, or if you already have GTM installed, you can probably skip this video and head to that one instead. Or perhaps you already installed Universal Analytics and you use the latest version of the global site tag, known as gtag.js. If so, there's a clever trick you can use to install GA4 without any additional code on the page via the Setup Assistant. We've got a video for that too, and again, you can probably skip to that one. But if you've got the older version of Universal Analytics that uses the analytics.js code snippet, or you don't have anything at all and you prefer not to use GTM, we'll show you the manual way to embed the code here in this video. So where we left you last time was right here. We had created the property. In this case, I've got one for the Hansel and Petal site. And we've got a few different instructions on how to tag this. As you can see, there's instructions if you're new, or if you already have a tag. There's also the tag manager. But again, in this video, we are going to go with the more manual route. So we're going to grab the site tag itself, just come down here, highlight this, and copy that into your buffer. And we are going to paste that into the head section of HTML on our site. So I'm going to pull that up. This is my HTML. Again, I'm looking for that head section, and I'm just going to go ahead and paste that in there, save it, and then I'm going to FTP that up to my site, or however you get the code onto your site. At that point, we can head over to the site, force a refresh. And the first thing I'm going to do is just look at the page source and make sure that code actually did make it onto the site. And kind of take note of this config ID here. So we've got this thing that starts usually with a G. In my case, it ends with P4S. The second thing I want to do is verify that the tag actually sent its data back to Google. A couple ways you can do that. You can use something like WASP, which is an add-on here that makes it fairly easy to look at this. But if you don't have WASP, another thing we can do is just head over here to the Network tab. And what we're going to do is search for this collect script. And you see this collect, this is how it actually sends the data back to Google Analytics. And again, we can see the request that went back. And again, we're looking for that number that starts with a G and ends with the P4S in our case. So now we know the data did get sent back to Google. And then one last thing we can do is head on over here to Analytics, and we can take a look at the real-time reports and see if the data has been processed yet. And don't be too concerned if this hasn't happened yet. Sometimes, especially for a brand new property or new account, this can take a little bit of time. But in our case, we can see that the data has come back here, and we are getting data filled into our Google Analytics account already. Now, at this point, I want to point out that we have only installed this on our home page in this case. You're going to have to go in and install this script on every page in your site. Normally, you're going to do this via some kind of an include file that goes in the header, or there's some other way that you don't have to manually do this every time. But one way or another, you need to make sure that this script is on every single page of your site. Okay, so now that we've verified this is on all the pages of our site, we've verified the data is actually coming into Google Analytics. We have successfully installed this and on our way to analysis. Okay, so we've looked at the manual way to install the code, which honestly I don't recommend for most people. A better way to do it is via a tag management system like Google Tag Manager, known as GTM. Now, in this video, we're going to assume that you already have a GTM account and you've installed the Tag Manager code snippet. If you don't, then now's a great time to watch the entire course I have on that subject that'll walk you through the entire process. Google Analytics 4 is built into GTM, so it's going to be a fairly straightforward process. First thing we want to do, we're starting here. We've created our property. This is for the Hansel and Petal site, and we want to copy down this measurement ID. This is going to be important. So we can go ahead and copy that. We've got tagging instructions here. Again, we're going to use the existing GTM that's already there. So we head on down here to Google Tag Manager, and we have the instructions here on how to implement this. So again, it tells us to grab that measurement ID, which we already did. And first, I actually want to head to the Hansel and Petal page. And I want to do view source and just make sure that we know that we've got the tag on there. So I'm looking for this Google Tag Manager page, and I want to look for this GTM number here and just verify that we've got the right one there. So we've got this one ending in V5LM, and then I head on over to Tag Manager. Okay, and then up here we can see I do have this container ends in V5LM, so everything is correct. I'm going to add a new tag. I'm going to Tag Configuration, and we want to select GA4 Configuration. Now here's where it's going to ask us for this measurement ID, so we go ahead and paste that in. And we're going to set this to trigger on each of these pages. So we trigger on all pages, or if you want it to be on a subset of pages, you can select that as well. But for most people, we're going to want to trigger this on all the pages. This is our base tag. I'm going to go up here. I usually want to give this a title. I'm going to call this my GA4 base tag. We go ahead and save that. And that's it. We're going to go ahead and submit this to publish this. And then we can head back to our site. And we can go ahead and refresh this page. But first, I want to pull up the developer console. So from Windows, I'm going to do that with Control-Shift-I. And I want to take a look at what's going to go across the network here. So if I refresh this page, I want to come to the filter. And what I'm going to search for is the collect script. The collect script is how it sends this data back to Google for processing. And I see the collect script here. And I see the request URL that went back, and it contains this number here, this G number. And again, we want to double check that that's the correct one that we sent back. So we look at this. So we'll go back to our analytics script and verify that, in fact, the measurement ID ending in P4S is the one that's being sent back there. Again, this is P4S. So now we know the data is being sent back to Google. And one more thing we can do to check is we can come back here to our Google Analytics account. We can come up here to the real-time reports and the little clock on there. And the real-time reports, I'm going to see whether or not that data we just sent back are here. And of course, we can see that it is. I've got one visitor, that's myself, here on the site. Now, sometimes it can take a little while for a brand new account to start seeing data here. So don't be too concerned if you don't see this in the real-time reports right away. If you see that hit being sent back to Google, you probably just need to be a bit patient. But there we go. We've got this installed using GTM, and we now have Google Analytics 4 on our site. So we've looked at the manual way to install the code, which I don't really recommend, and the GTM method, which is great, but it does require that you set up and use Google Tag Manager. But there is one more way that's kind of unique in that it also doesn't require any additional code on the page. If you have a Universal Analytics tag already on the site, which is the previous version of Google Analytics, and it uses the updated version of the tag called the Global Site Tag, or gtag.js, then it can act like a tag manager and populate your GA4 property with that existing tag. Now, personally, I'm not a huge fan of this way. It makes it a little bit tougher to troubleshoot, and it forces you to maintain the older implementation style. And with the new event-driven data model from Google Analytics 4, I prefer to have a clean break with a clean installation. But if you can't easily edit the code on the page, then this can allow you an easy way to populate your GA4 data today with no code changes while you wait on those code edits to come at a later time. And that can be a really smart strategy. So we're here at a similar screen to when we finished setting up the property. Now again, this must be in the account where you already have an existing Universal Analytics property as well. So we're here looking at the tagging instructions, and we're going to go over here to use an existing on-page tag. Click down the Google Analytics, and it's going to give us some instructions here. And again, we want to copy this measurement ID. It's the same one up here, so I'm going to go ahead and copy that. Okay, now we're going to move back to our Universal Analytics property. So in this case, I'm going to come back up here to this particular property, come down here to the admin section. Now, one thing I want to do is make sure that this is in fact the one that we've got on the site. So I'm going to come here to tracking code, and I'm going to look at this and make sure this tag is what's there. So this one ends in 9543. Go over to my site, look at the source code, and in fact, make sure that that is there. So we have that tag and it ends in 9543. Okay, so now we know that that is the tag that's existing on the site. We've double checked that we're in the right property. Okay, and where we want to come over here is to the GA4 Setup Assistant. Now here we have the option to create a brand new GA4 property, but we've already done that. So we're going to instead come down here to select an existing one, the Hansel and Petal, and connect those two properties. Now sometimes the UI can look a little bit different, so I'm going to show you a different way as well. So we can come back here, back to the home, and if we would come over here to the tracking code, and we can scroll down here to connected site tags, We can enter the ID of the tag to connect. Again, we want to use that same one from before. Give it this nickname again. Okay, so now we've connected these two together. And when we load up the page for Universal Analytics, it's also going to send the data in and populate our Google Analytics 4 property. Okay, so a couple ways we want to verify that. We can head on over to the page here. I'm going to do a Control-Shift-I to bring up my developer interface. And we're going to force a reload of the page. And again, what I'm looking for here is that collect script. That's going to tell us that the data got sent back to Google. Now I see here are two of these. And the first one here, I'm sending it back and I can see my Universal Analytics tag here. The second one, I want to come down and take a look, and I'm looking for this TID, and there I can see my Google Analytics 4 tag being sent. So we can see that both these are being sent back to Google. The next thing we can do is go over here to the real-time reports within Google Analytics, and I want to switch my reporting view to my new Google Analytics 4 and make sure that that's getting populated. Come back up here to the real-time reports, and here we can see my data just came in. So there we are. Without adding any more code onto the page, we were able to start populating the reports in Google Analytics 4 via the tag from Universal Analytics. And so the data is going to both. We're populating both. And so as time goes on, we'll have the data in Google Analytics 4 without adding any code. In the last videos, we've shown you how to begin collecting data for your own site. Now, because that's brand new, it can take some time for that data to stream in and start populating reports over time. And you won't have all the goals and conversions and so on configured yet, but we don't want to wait to dive into our analysis. So for the purposes of this course, we're going to borrow some demo data from Google. It's going to help us walk through all the features of Google Analytics 4. Now, for this demo data and for many examples in this course, the account that we're going to be pulling from and analyzing data is the same demo account that Google themselves use, which is connected to their merchandise store and a mobile app game called Floodit. The merch site is where they sell t-shirts and other Google branded things, and Google's allowed us to use the data they collect on that store and app and made it available via a special analytics account. Now this is great because we can see the real-time, real-life data, and it also has the advantage of coming from a real e-commerce website, which I know not all of you have set up, and that way it allows us to see some actual transactions flowing through, which are really great intuitive examples of a few of the features. So we're going to be focusing on the reports within this demo account. Now I know many of you like to watch this first and then go back and actually follow along with the course, and because this demo data is public, you can do so. So to gain access to the account for yourself, the easiest way really is just to go to google.com and do a search for Google Analytics Demo Account. Should be one of the first results here, the demo account, and it's going to send you to an article that explains how to get access here. What you want to do is just actually scroll on down, and there's going to be a link out here for Access Demo Account. So we go ahead and click on that, and it's going to put us directly here into that property. So we're going to go ahead, if this haven't popped up before, we can take a look at these and select the ones you want, and then it's going to pop us right here into this account. I want to go up here and just take a quick look at what we've got. So we have the demo account. It's been added to next to your other accounts that might be in here like anything else. They have the different account. So you've got two different GA4 accounts here, Floodit and the merchandise store. And so they've also got the Universal Analytics one down here from the past. We're focused on the GA4 ones, and we're going to go ahead and click into the merchandise store. Okay, now we only have read access here, so we can't make any configuration changes to the admin section or add users, but this is going to be great for analyzing data. This is what we're going to be using from here on out, so feel free to have a look around, but we now have some demo data. So while we wait for the data to start populating into your first account, let's talk a little bit more about how to structure these accounts, properties, and streams, and how they all nest together. At the very top is your overall Google account. Now this isn't your Google Analytics account. This is your login, your password to all the Google services, Gmail, Analytics, AdWords, Google Meet, and so on. As we've touched on before, you create your Google Analytics account with your overall Google user login. Now, the difference between those two can be a little bit confusing, but it is important to know that when we talk about the Google Analytics account, that's going to be different than your Google login account. Now, while you start with one Google Analytics account when you first start using this, you can actually create numerous accounts, all nested under that one Google account, according to your business needs. Many of you, in addition to the GA4 account we're creating here, will have an account of the previous type of Google Analytics, Universal Analytics, and those can live side by side under a single login. But here, we're just focused on the GA4 side of things. And the account level usually serves as the entity for an entire business's analytics reporting. So, as long as you have one singular business you want to report on, we suggest you just stick to that one account for the business. But you may consider having access to several accounts. For example, if your position requires analyzing multiple clients' websites. Or, like you see in this slide, maybe you have one for your personal website and then another one there for your company, but they're both tied back to your one Google account login. Or, if your company has multiple brands and you have multiple different sites that are completely unique entities, you could add different accounts for each of those as well. Now, within each account is at least one property. We generally recommend a business to have a property for each site or platform. So in this case here, we have a company and it has a property that's just for website data, just for mobile app data, and we've got one for combined app plus web. In fact, Google Analytics 4 used to be called App Plus Web, which really gives you an idea of what this power is about, being able to put those both in the same property. And on the personal site here, we don't have any apps. We just have a single site going into there. Now, each of these can be tied back to a stream. And so we can think of these streams as coming from different data sources. You can have streams that come from iOS apps, Android apps, and web stream apps. Let's take an actual look at an example of this for how Google's is structured. In their case, they have one GA4 account called Google Demos, and then there's two different properties. There's the site where they sell all of their different merchandise, and that only has a web stream associated with it. But there's also another site called Floodit. And Floodit has its own website, so it has a web stream. It has an Android app, so it has an Android stream. And it has an iOS app, so it has an iOS stream, all coming into a single Floodit property. In fact, let's go over and take a look at how that looks on the site itself. Okay, we're here on the demo account. We're going to go into admin, and we see the account. And then over here, we see the two different properties. We have the Floodit and the merchandise store. We also have the Universal Analytics, but we're not going to look at that right now. Then we click into the Floodit, and remember, for the Floodit, it had different data streams in there. It has one for Android, one for iOS, and one for the web. Okay, so you can see how we can nest each of these data streams inside of the properties, which are, again, nested back here inside of the accounts. Everyone's situation is slightly different, but hopefully this gives you some thought about how you want to nest your accounts, properties, and streams. Measuring how and where traffic is coming from to our site is one of the most important things we can measure in analytics. Now, here's an example of a report we're going to look at in a bit more detail later, but it gives you an idea of the where and the how, which we said earlier are the source and the medium. You can see that here at the top. So coming down, we can see that Google is the highest source and the medium is organic search. And we also have direct visits. That's where someone just types the URL right into the browser. So the source is direct and there is no medium. We also have a link that someone clicked in an email signature, and the medium is email, and we have a Twitter post on social media. We also have a referral from the website LinkedIn, and that's just a fancy way of saying that someone was referred by following a link, so those are hyperlink clicks. So some of this information, like the referrals and organic search and of course direct, is automatically captured by the browser and passed along. Google Analytics grabs that info and uses it wherever it can. But sometimes we need to take that a step further and make it really powerful. If we're able to supply some extra info about the click, perhaps that this click is part of a paid campaign or an email or social media post, well, how does Google know that? Well, we have a way of doing that, and we can tell Google Analytics to track that extra info. We call this manual tagging. Let's look at an example here. Let's say that you have a marketing campaign happening with just one source. So in this case, our source is Twitter. How do we differentiate the traffic coming in from a tweet on sale items versus another tweet on a buy one, get one free for t-shirts? Well, since the source is Twitter, of course the medium is social, there's no way to separate these two lines of traffic with just these two pieces of information. And what we don't want to do is start stuffing extra info into these. And you're going to cause more problems when you want to look at all of your social traffic grouped together. What we're going to do is use another field entirely. This is where campaign tracking comes in. In the campaign reports, this is one of the most useful and important concepts in Google Analytics. When you add these campaigns to the mix, you can track different marketing initiatives by source, medium, and a campaign name. So let's think back to this Twitter example. By tagging the two Twitter posts here as different campaigns, we can easily differentiate between the two traffic groups, both coming in from that source. Because we've tagged the top one as a flash sale and we've tagged the bottom one as a buy one, get one free t-shirt, actually, let's look exactly how we would do that. We're going to track these campaigns using what we call UTM parameters. They're going to be a regular URL, and we're just going to stuff some extra information, these UTM parameters, into that URL. And Google has a special tool to help us do this and make sure the formatting gets right. And you could copy this in and type this in, or we can just head on over here to Google and type in Google Analytics URL Builder. It'll take us right there. Okay, so the first thing we want to do here is put in our website. And we actually have to type in the HTTPS. And the next thing we want to do is put in our source. So we set our source as Twitter, our medium is social, and our campaign name was buy one, get one free. Now we can also put in content. So this is often used to differentiate the creative you use. So maybe this one we used a blue t-shirt. So we come down here and it's generated this URL for us. So we'll go ahead and copy that URL. And when someone clicks on this link, it will open up the site. And as you'll see, it's just going to be the regular page here. So the page we put in this case, is just the home page. And these extra URL parameters here, they don't do anything to change the site itself, but they're telling the underlying analytics how to track these. The source should be Twitter, the medium should be social, the campaign should be buy one, get one free, and the content is the blue t-shirt. So that's all going to be sent back to Google as part of this traffic source recording. So if we do this for all of the links that we generate and we put out in our tweets and our social media posts or emails that we send, we will categorize how this is seen into Google Analytics and we'll get much better data, which will result in much better analysis. I can't stress the importance enough of campaign tagging. By tagging these campaigns consistently here, we make it very easy to come back, analyze this, and understand which of these things are being clicked on, which ones are working, which ones are converting, and which ones aren't. So now that we've set up our account, we've installed the tracking code, we're populating our databases with data, and we've added the Google demo account, it's time to dig in and actually do some analysis. We're here in the Google Merch Stores demo account. We're looking at the mobile app on iOS, Android, and the web app all combined in a single view. Looking over here at the left nav, so compared to previous, gone are the hundreds of pre-built reports, and we've radically streamlined this down to just what you see here. Just the four main areas, which we can drill down into, along with the admin settings all the way down here at the bottom. Now, the idea is that we'll build the reports we need to get the info we want to answer the questions we have. Now, of course, if we come up here to reports, we're going to see some pre-built template reports, and note that this is all configurable via this library button down here at the bottom. So you may see something different, but in the plain vanilla is going to include these lifecycle reports, including information on customer acquisitions, engagement, monetization, and retention. Now, these reports follow a common analysis pattern. So first we have to acquire the customer, then we need to engage them, and then hopefully we get a successful paying customer, which we measure in monetization, and ultimately turn them into a long-term customer, which we can measure here in retention. Inside each of these headings are going to be several reports, and a few of these are going to dive into detail later in the course. We also down here have a user section. It's going to provide some information about the various users of our sites and apps, including their demographic data and the technology and devices they use to access our content. Now, GA4 does allow us to do a better job of trying to follow a single user over time, even across devices. So ideally, we don't see a user on their phone and their laptop as two different people, which makes the user reports much more accurate and useful. Now, this doesn't work in every scenario, but it is much improved. Okay, back here to the left nav. And we're also going to dig into these Explore reports later and do a little bit more advanced analysis. It's a really powerful tool. And for those that are using Google or other digital platforms for advertising, it's no surprise there's a dedicated section here to optimizing that in their analytics tool. And we have a host of other configuration options, which is related to, but not the same as the admin panel down here at the bottom. Now, in addition to this nav, remember, you can always come up here and do a search on the top. Some of the suggestions that they give here in terms of the types of things you can look for. And they are pretty remarkable in terms of being able to kind of parse your questions. So I encourage you to give that a shot. But coming back here to the home screen, We've got here this dashboard here, and it's going to pull in some data from a lot of the reports that were previously there. So this is card-based. It's a little bit of a departure from the usual graph and table that we've seen previously. And the idea is to give you a sense for how your site or app is performing. We can come down here and change the time. Let's go here to 90 days. And we'll see stats for that. Of course, we can change the graph based on each of these elements. And over here, we also see the real-time reports, which are actually the opposite. This is what's happening on your site right now versus this is accumulation of the last 90 days. But these couple of reports are almost a teaser. If you want a more traditional dashboard with various configurable reports, go ahead and click on the report snapshot. It's going to take you here, and this is what you'll see as more of a traditional dashboard. Of course, all of these are configurable to your needs by clicking the Edit button up here in the top right. And again, coming back to home over here, we also see down at the bottom the insights down here. Now, dashboards have their place, but for deep analysis, we as humans can only do so much scanning every day to find insightful things. One thing Google has plenty of is cloud compute power and machine learning and AI expertise. So we get a little taste of that here in the Insights reports. One thing that's always interesting is seeing where spikes are coming, right? We want to see unusual behavior, and it can constantly kind of scan for those and look for interesting insights. Total purchasers here for mobile in a particular geography that spiked. And again, we can click to view all the insights, or you can come up here in the top right and you can ask a little bit more for insightful information based on the various things you may be interested in. One thing I really like about both these reports and the insights is that because the cross-device nature of GA4, these aren't limited just by browsers and cookies, but they can give us better insights across devices. So while you probably won't do a ton of analysis here in the home screen, it does give you a very quick scan of how your site or app is doing, and it's a great jumping off point. So we're here on the home screen. One of the first reports we see when we come down here to the reports section is the real-time report. Real-time reports give a sense for what's happening right now. Just like if we walked into our brick and mortar store, we took a look around to get a snapshot of what it's like at any given minute. And we showed earlier how it can be useful for a bit of troubleshooting in the initial setup. Where it really comes alive is when your data is flowing in from real live users. And here we can see where our active users are in the world. We can see some of the devices they're using. And unlike previous real-time reports that were extremely limited, we can get some config options and dimensions right here in the reports in real time. Right here, we've got users by their first user source. We can come down, we could select medium, and we can see that we have some configuration options as well as more information by each of these reports. Now, over here on your event count and event name might look a little bit different whether you have a website or like us here, you're tracking an app, but this can be useful as well. Now, to take our earlier popping into a store analogy a little bit further, let's say you wanted to digitally walk up to a random person in the store and observe exactly how their browsing session is going on your site, or in this case, an app. You come up here to View User Snapshot, and this is going to load a random user's journey here. It's going to load their session. And as we see here, we can click through. This is a user from South Africa on a Huawei. We can see different devices that are being used to access this, as well as different locations that these random users are from. We also see this timeline here, and this is going to give us an idea of what's happening there. We can see some of the events that are happening. Let's find one with a little bit more detail we can dive into. So here we've got a user from Nigeria. We can see the screens that they're using, and on those screens we can see the different parameters. I can click over here and see the different properties that are being set as well. Again, as we scroll through this timeline, you can see the exact state of the app and what those properties and parameters were at the time that these things happened. Here we have level up, and then it went to a level end. We can also see the top events over the last 30 minutes, as well as which of those user properties are active right now at this given moment. And these are all aspects of the current state of the app itself that are being reflected back to Google Analytics to help with our analysis. Okay, come back here to the main screen. And, I tend to look at real-time reports when something big is happening. A big app launch or a Super Bowl ad just aired, and you want to see the real-time action. And because those tend to be only occasional events, you're probably not going to do a ton of heavy analysis here, but it is a unique view of the customers that really can't be replicated any other way. Segmentation into smaller groups is the first step in true analysis, and we have a lot of tools to segment users in Google Analytics. We'll walk you through lots of ways to create these segments in the various reports and analysis, but the key idea here is the same in all of them. That we're going to stop looking at our visitors as one big homogeneous entity, and instead we're going to group and cluster them by similar characteristics so we can better understand them, and then we're better poised to take action and optimize our site and our business. The first place we're going to start up here is the comparisons, and we can do that even right here on the home screen. It's kind of similar to audiences, which we'll take a look at later, but it doesn't require any additional permissions. So we can just come up here and click Add a Comparison, and then it's going to give us a box here where we can include or exclude various dimensions. So for example, if I want to do one based on country, I can come down here and include country, and perhaps I want to include everyone from the United States into this particular comparison. And then I can apply that. And you see we have another orange box here, and that's going to give us another line on the graph, which includes folks in the United States. Now I want to add another comparison, which is going to exclude people in the United States, so everyone else outside of the US. So again, I'm going to select country, hit OK, and apply. Now, what I've shown here, what often happens, I think there's a little bit of a bug, and this is what we mean by sometimes we're in beta here. It doesn't go. So what I do is refresh the page and just add the comparison again. And usually this works. So we come in here, do country, United States, and we want to exclude this one. Okay, now apply this, and it usually goes. There we go. So now I have all users, people inside the United States, people outside the US, and I'm actually just going to go ahead and get rid of the all users so that I can just compare these two side by side. And we can see how a users in the rest of the world compare to my users inside the US. For in terms of total users, we have slightly more outside the US. In terms of new users, we can even look at things like average engagement over time. And in this case, despite the fact that we have more outside the US, our US users appear to be more engaged. And somewhat similar, but we see a few comparisons in terms of total revenue as well. Okay, let's look at a different variation of this. We can come up and add a new comparison, go by gender, and I'm going to add a female audience. Okay, and again, I'm going to have to refresh. Okay, we're going to include gender, female, hit OK, and apply, and this is going to be our female audience. And then we'll add a comparison for our male audience as well. And we're going to have to do the refresh thing again. Okay, add a comparison, and again, we'll add a gender male. This is our male audience, and we'll apply that as well. Now, in this case, we have in the US, outside the US, female and male. I'm going to get rid of these first two so that we can examine just the gender ones side by side. Okay, and in terms of total users, we actually have more in the male side, but what's interesting, when we go to the average engagement time, we see that our females have a higher engagement. Another thing I want to look at, if we scroll down, we can see all of our various tables here also broken out by the female versus male, and the same thing from where the countries of origin and so on. And this follows, these comparisons follow. So for example, if I click into the traffic acquisition report here, we see that it follows. So I have my female audience, my male audience in both of the charts, as well as the tables down here as well. We can see the total female, the total male, and then each of these different acquisition channels is broken out by female and male as well. So that's the comparisons tool. So much of our analysis revolves around comparing these different groupings to understand how our various users are unique. So it's a really powerful tool. In the previous video, you may have noticed how Google starts to customize the tables down here to reflect the comparisons that we've been building. Now, Google's actually utilized something here called a secondary dimension, and I use it quite often for any table, not just when we're doing the comparisons and the graphs, but we can build it into any table. So let's go ahead and show how to do that. First, let's just go ahead and clear out these comparisons that might be there. And now that'll get us just back to the regular flat table. And then let's go ahead and change the primary dimension to session media. And this is how people arrived at the site or the app. And then to get a secondary dimension, we click on the plus, and we want to see, let's go down to session acquisition because we're using a session medium. We want to have like for like. And campaigns. Let's see if there were campaigns we were running bringing traffic. And sure enough, in top 10 here, we have a few campaigns that crack the top 10. It's in CPC, which makes sense. That's an advertising medium. Okay, so that shows how we build in secondary dimensions. Let's look at the same concept, but slightly different. Floodit is an app, and so I might be interested in the app version that people are running. And so we can come down here to the technology reports and tech details. And as part of those tech details, we can have app version as our primary dimension. So let's go ahead and set that. Instead of browser, I'm going to search for app version. There it is. And this is going to tell us all the various versions of the app that are out there that people are running when they load up the game. Now, as you can see, some of these are a bit behind. Maybe I'm curious at which OS various versions are running. So for each of those, I can come down here and we'll just search for OS. So we come to device, OS with version. And here we see that for example, 2.6.53 is on iOS, various flavors of Android running the 2.65. Now, these two things are related, right? Which versions of the app are on which OSs, but these don't have to be related. They can be completely different. Maybe I want to see which platforms people are running that are most common in which parts of the world. So I'm going to clear out my secondary dimension here by clicking the X. Come back here and I'm going to look at the platform. This is going to be iOS versus Android versus the web. And then for the secondary dimension, I want to look at country. So I've still got OS in here. I'm going to clear that out. Click on country, and this will show me which platform people are running in which place. So it's interesting. For a Google game, you can see Android does tend to dominate all the way through. India's got 6 times as high as any other one here of the US coming in second. But as far as iOS, the US has the most iOS users, but it's behind even Android users in Bangladesh. So we can see, pretty far down at 7th place. But let's say that we are interested in these iOS users and all the Android users are kind of crowding that out. One thing I want to point out, a handy little tool up here, we can just go up to the search and we can put in iOS, and that's going to filter and limit all the responses in the table to just what I've searched up here. So in this case, you can see these are going to be only the iOS folks. So I can see the second one is quite a ways down. We would have had to search a long way to get down into some of these, but since we've filtered that out there, we can directly compare. Now, of course, we could do a comparison at the top and build that and do the same thing, but I think this is a bit quicker way to get exactly there, and it's what we want right away. So always a useful tool. So I hope you can get really comfortable with comparisons, secondary dimensions, and filters, as they can really expand the power and the efficiency of your analysis. As we said in the prior video, when we only look at our visitors in one aggregate blob, as if they all behave exactly the same and have the same motivations and outcomes, we're really missing out on the real power of analytics. So once you do your analysis and you find your key segments you'd like to refer back to and perhaps engage with directly through advertising or other personalized engagement, then you want to create what we call an audience. This is kind of similar to the old advanced segments in the previous version of Google Analytics. We can head down here under Configure to Audiences. This does require you have edit access to this particular property. And we've got already here all users, people who've made a purchase, but what we want to do is create a new audience. You have a few options here. Under the suggested, you have recently active users, people who have not yet made a purchase, and then under templates, a few more things we can look at around demographics, technology, and how people come to the site. We're going to go ahead and create a custom audience. So here's where we include the requirements to be part of this audience. And by default, we are including users when the thing is true here. These conditions can include dimensions, metrics, and events. You can also define a sequence of things that can happen, or even a certain order things have to happen. So let's create an audience. So let's say that I'm interested in looking at people who are engaged users outside of the US. So in order to do this, I first need to define users who are engaged. So we come down here and you see I have a full list of all of our dimensions as well as some metrics. And I'm going to define engage as someone who's done 3 or more sessions. So in here I can look for session start, which is what we have every time you would start a new session. And I'm going to add the parameter that says the total count of those session starts needs to be more than, let's say, 3. Now I can apply a time period here as well. We'll talk about that in just a moment. In this case, I'm not going to. Okay, and then the other thing we said was that I want this to be someone who is non-converting, actually. So I add that to my title. I want these to be people who are engaged, but haven't yet pulled the trigger. So I'm going to come here, add a new condition as an and, so both these have to be true. And we have under user lifetime value. And I'm going to say when your lifetime value is 0. Now, another thing you can do is apply a scope for this. And I'm going to say this is applying across all sessions, but you can also apply things within a same session or within a single event. So for example, if you want to say that you have to have purchased an item of clothing in the category of men's athletic clothing and the metric for that purchase price must be higher than $100. So then you would want that to be within the same single event. Otherwise, you could end up with someone who bought a $4 pair of athletic socks, but who also had a hard drive in their cart that cost $150. So you would want that one to be within the same event. Now, it's also handy to be able to exclude users from time to time. In this case, we said we want to exclude the US users, but it's also very common we create audiences for remarketing where we want to exclude our existing customers so we're not wasting money marketing back to people who are already customers. So we're going to go ahead and exclude them permanently when the country, so we head on down here to geography, country ID contains US. And we're going to say pretty much at any point that's true. Okay, so over here you can see in summary we've got a preview. It starts out with your entire universe of users and then those we have selected with our condition and then those we have excluded in here in the second part. And this is a property that doesn't have a whole lot of data in it, so this is a fairly small number. Okay, and lastly, I want to also add that people, not just who didn't make purchases, but who didn't submit a form. So in that case, I have a form submit event, and I want that event count. If it's greater than 0, then I also want them to be excluded. Okay, lastly up here we have membership duration. Now speaking of remarketing lists and suppression, it's really handy that you can set this duration. Going back to that clothing example, perhaps you want to exclude people who made that purchase, so again, you're not wasting that budget. But it's not uncommon that people who buy clothes from one brand return at some point to buy more. So after a certain amount of time, you may want to have those folks return to the remarketing pool and back into this audience. So you could set this duration here, and each time a user's behavior matches these conditions, this duration will be reset automatically, otherwise it would expire. It's probably worth calling out that as long as this definition remains in place, Google will constantly be adding folks in and out of this group. It's not something that only happens when you hit this save button here. So we do want to go ahead and hit the save button here, and this will give us an audience which we could go ahead and apply to our dashboard. Again, we have a fairly small number here, so I want to take a look at another one. Let's go back to our demo example here. In the merchandise store, here's a few examples they've got set up. So people who viewed Android products, particularly engaged users like we did, people who added an item to the cart but did not purchase, that's a perfect remarketing list, people in a specific place, and so on. And again, if we were to apply this to the dashboard, then it would automatically set all of the numbers that we're seeing here to be only for that particular audience. And lastly, I just want to show you, this is for the app, and the app brings us some really interesting things. For example, people who have experienced a fatal crash, and we want to look and understand what's going on with that a bit more. People who have completed past the first 10 levels, people who completed past their first level. I would be interested in people who completed a bit but didn't come back, what's happening there, and particular events that have happened inside of your app. So these audiences are incredibly useful for analysis, but they'll also be available for remarketing through the Google Ads ecosystem. And since remarketing style campaigns are among the highest ROI, this is a great way to build those audiences if you're interested in doing so. The two most fundamental questions of our analysis are, how did my users get here, and what did they do while they're here? I want to understand if the time and money that I spent on certain marketing efforts is working to attract the right amounts and the quality of users that I'm looking for. Now, as an analytics consultant to thousands of businesses over the last decade, it continues to shock me how many business leaders simply don't know how they get customers. It is critical to know, and this is why we're going to dive into the acquisition reports first. So come here under Reports, and we're going to head here to Acquisition. Now, they're broken down here to the acquisition overview and then a focus on the overall users, regardless of how many sessions, events, or different devices that they might use. And then we're going to drill down into the individual sessions. How did you arrive when you came on this particular time? And we've also got this one here. You may not see that second one there because it's a custom report that somebody made on this demo account via the library function. So we're not going to worry about that for now. Just know that such customizations are available if you want to learn a little bit more. So on the dashboard here, we're going to start out looking at the high-level questions. How many came overall? How many are new? And how many came here just in the last 30 minutes? Now we can look at the medium and the channels which they arrived. Remember, that's the how. We can look at the campaigns. We ostensibly spent money on those. And even the overall lifetime value, which is hovering just over $1 here. So it looks like we're in need of some optimization. Now, we can change the medium here to be other dimensions. But to really dive in, we should go to the next section and kind of get away from the overview here. We can look at the user section here. Now, these two sections are actually exactly the same, except for one is going to look at the data by user and the other one here by session. Now, I'm going to head back. Let's just start with the user one here. I prefer to actually see source and medium together. So you'll have kind of the default channel grouping here, but I like to be able to see source/medium together as one. I just find that to be a useful one, so I'm going to change it to that. And so first we have the source and then the medium. So we see Google CPC, Google Organic, even some Baidu in here, some other referrals. Now remember, referrals are going to be people who are linking to you. They are referring traffic from their site to yours. I find those particularly interesting. I want to know who out on the web is linking to my content that's ostensibly driving business. And so let's actually search on that up here, and it will limit our results to just those referrals. So go ahead and create those referrals, and now I can just see the top 10 sites that are linking out to me. Now, the next question I have is, where are they linking to? And so I want to keep the where are they from, but I want to add a secondary dimension that's going to be where they're linking to. And that's going to be the page location. So I can type in page here and come under custom event and type page location. So now this is going to be, again, on the left where they're being referred from. And on the right, we'll see the page on our site where they're referring to. Now, if you need a little bit more room here, we can collapse the bar here. And then even if you hover over, it will show the full page location there. So for example, the Creator Academy here on YouTube is linking to somewhere over here on the YouTube brand shop. Okay, that makes sense. I also see Coursera. It's an interesting one, linking to the homepage. Art Analytics App Spot, I'm not sure what that is. They're linking to the campus collection and Perks at Work. That sounds like something where Google employees can probably buy that. So we're sorted here by quantity of traffic, but outcomes matter as well. We want to see who's driving not just the highest quantity, but the most valuable. So we could come over here and sort by conversions, or let's go ahead and just sort by revenue, since we have an actual dollar amount associated here. And this is going to resort that list. Okay, so now we see the Art Analytics is actually driving the highest amount of revenue. That was when we saw it coming into the campus creators. So granted, most of these referrals actually look like other Google-owned sites, which you would expect for the company's store. But in your data, these are likely to be other sites out in the real world who are linking to your site, and so it'd be really interesting to see who is linking to where and what their traffic is doing. If you're finding sites that are sending you lots of traffic, perhaps you have an affiliate relationship in place with them, or perhaps you should, or at least a thank you card. Okay, spend some time digging through these reports. I promise it is some of your most valuable data in your account. We said the two biggest questions in analysis are, how did my users get here, and what did they do once they're here? Now, we already addressed how they got here, and what did they do can be broken down into two questions. How did they engage with our content, and whether or not they converted? Now, the first, how they engaged, we're going to handle here in this video, looking at the aptly named engagement section. So again, we come here under reports and we see a section engagement. We have the usual dashboard overview. It's going to give us a high level look at what's happening. You've got the average engagement time, engaged sessions per user, average engagement time per session, the number of views, and the overall event count, which I find the overall event count to be super useful, except maybe billing in the paid version. But then we see on the left nav over here some deep dives, and we can dive into the events that are happening, as well as the conversions, and then pages and screens. Now, keep in mind that pages and screens, everything is really an event. Pages and screens are just more specific kinds of events. And let's actually dive in there first. Okay, at the bottom down here, we have the standard table. By default, this is going to be sorted by the number of views, pages, or screens. And note that it is divided here by the titles. So if you have multiple pages or screens that have the same title, for example, maybe you have a product detail view. So you may have lots of different types of, maybe it's clothing, you have shirts and shoes and pants. But if the title is product detail view for all of those, they're going to get bunched together here in one line. For example, I'm kind of suspicious of this shopping cart line. Now, you may have lots of steps through a shopping cart funnel, but unless the developer took the time to name each one of those pages separately, they're all going to get coalesced here together as one line. One thing we could do is we could sort this by page location instead, although that gets a little bit messy just looking at all the page locations. So instead, what I like to do is keep the title, which is a little bit more of an indicator of what it is, and instead separate those out by page location as a secondary dimension. That way you won't allow them all to be grouped in together. So we can come here and look at page location as a secondary dimension. All right, so let's get a little bit more rows here. And sure enough, we do see shopping cart shows up a few times in here as separate page locations. So those were getting combined together. We also see the home page here get separated out as well. One of them has stored at HTML, the other just being the root as well. So keep an eye on that. Scrolling up, I want to highlight this chart up here. It's got two axes on here, and it's got users and views by default. Now, unless we have a single page view lots of times by a user, those two are likely to be in kind of linear lockstep, and they are. We would expect that the more users a page gets, the more views that it would have, and they are. But instead of having two quantity metrics, we can put a quantity and a quality metric up there. So we'll keep views, but we can come down here, and if we sort by something like, well, we could look at event counts, we could look at dollars. Let's go with unique user scrolls. It's an interesting engagement one here. And there we start to see some differences. So the views per page, but we start to see a little bit of separation that might give us an indication on how users are engaging with a particular site. Again, you can click through here and examine what's happening in your site, but it gives you a little bit of an indication when you have quantity on one side and a quality or engagement metric on the other. And this chart here will change as you sort the particular table below. Okay, so this type of page content analysis tends to be a little bit less interesting for a shopping cart dominated site, but for a site that invests heavily in content, these reports are going to be critical. Now, these are page and screen focused, what we looked at here. Next, we're going to look at the more general events category. Google Analytics 4 is an event-driven model, which means that everything is part of an event. The page view data we just looked at is really just an event of type page view. Even the start of a session is just an event firing called session start. Now recall that one of the first videos had this screen. Every time a page is viewed, a page view event gets fired. And inside of that event are several parameters which each have a value. The location of the page, the title of the page, even the resolution of the screen that's viewing the page, and so on. Now Google Analytics 4 has a lot of these built-in events. That's how it works. But it also allows you to code up your own. Now that's a bit beyond the scope of this class, but if your site or app creator has included those custom events, they can be viewed here in these reports as well. So if we head back to those reports here under the engagement and events, we can see all of these different events by name, including that session start event here. And if I were to click into that one and filter into just the session start, I can see the various parameters that are part of this. One of those is page title. Now, remember we said that this is what kicks off the very beginning of a session. So the page that fires this event is the landing page. This is where you start your journey. And so when we see this page title one, this is the title of the landing page, the location of the landing page. These are the pages that kicked off the session. Now, for a slightly different view, let's go over to the Flooded app and see the type of events that get fired in an app. Same screen here, but we see a few different ones on here. These have more to do with how the game is played. We see a few here on the level. And actually, I want to see this one. I see one called level fail. I want to search on this. Yeah, we see two different events around fail. And I've always thought when you're playing certain games that there would be that one level that was just too hard. It was out of place. And I wondered if the developers could see that everyone was hitting a wall on that particular level. Now, I don't know if they coded that into this app, but I see that they are recording this. So let's dive in and see what this might be. So in fact, we do see the various levels here, and then the times that they were recording a fail event on those various levels. Again, I don't know exactly how they did this or if that's what this is, but it seems like a great way to see if there's that certain level that is getting disproportionately more fails. Or you could really dive in and see which level was causing people to abandon the game forever, either because it was too hard or maybe that level is just too boring. So events like this can take a little bit of getting used to wrap your head around, but once you do, you can see that they're very powerful and very versatile. Many of you are here to make money off of your site or app, either directly by e-commerce or through selling ads. If that's not the case, you can certainly stick around to learn more, but also no harm if you choose to just skip right over this section. For the purposes of illustration, we'll focus more on the e-commerce and conversion side. If you do have an e-commerce site, you'll need to send back e-commerce hits via your shopping cart. The details of that will vary depending on your cart software, and it's kind of outside the scope of this beginner course, but your developer should be able to integrate this without too much trouble as it's pretty well documented. Now looking at this, what jumps right out at me in the charts for the Google Merch Store is that we have almost no repeat buyers. Of the 4,700 purchasers, 4,500 of them are first-timers, which is good to know. Looking down here, the average purchase revenue per user was $7.22, which is always good to understand if we're paying for traffic. So paid search and Instagram ads and so on, we need to know how much we can afford per person. But I would want to dive in a little bit more to understand when people do make a purchase, what is that average purchase price? So we could go up to comparisons and we could limit our audience to just purchasers and see how this would look, as we showed that in a prior video. We also want to understand a little bit more about the journey and the steps along the way. We can see down here some of the promotions that were leading to an item view, some of the revenue by coupon, and so on. Let's go ahead and click into the main screen here. So this is a familiar look by now, and again, take your eye to this 2-axis chart here, and I would suggest we want to view a quantity metric and a quality metric, such as revenue. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and that's going to change our axes there to item views and item revenue. And what kind of jumps out at us here? Well, the speckled T up here is going to get a lot of views, but doesn't make a whole lot of money. And if we come down and look at some here, the puff jacket brings in a lot of dollars per view. And overall, we can see that the hoodie is driving a lot of traffic and money, which again, we see down here in the table where it is in fact the #1 driver of revenue. But, those might just be high-priced items, so they can inflate it a little bit. If we sort over here by purchase quantity, then we get a little bit of a different story. And we can start to see how things go there, or we could actually just jump right in here and sort by purchase to view rate. And the only downside of that is you tend to get some kind of obscure ones that have a very high rate. And of course, we want to throw out this not set data. That's a bit erroneous. But first real one down here, the Google Emoji Magnet Set. It may not get a lot of visitors, but those who do tend to really want to buy it. Okay, so there's a lot of great data to be mined here. I suggest you go ahead and dive in. Keep in mind, this data really serves as a double value because it really makes all the other reports that we look at better for it. For example, when I'm evaluating who sends me traffic or which of my paid search campaigns is working, having the ability to sort by this e-commerce data is pretty much the only metric that matters. So we may not necessarily view these reports directly, but this data makes all the rest of the reports better. Depending on your business strategy, the concept of user retention might be all important. Many businesses will lose money to gain a user, but then hope to make it up over time. Now, as we saw in the earlier e-commerce video, that is not the strategy of the Google Merch Store, or at least I hope it isn't, as they had very few returning purchasers. But what about the installed game, the flooded game? That might be a little bit different, so let's go ahead and check that out. Now, this is different indeed. They actually have more returning users than new users. And we often talk about cohort analysis and retention, and it can be particularly interesting if you have large events that drive people in batches. I tend to think of cohorts kind of like a generation. You have your millennials, your boomers, Gen X, etc., or even a graduating class. You all entered your freshman year at one time, you move up, and then you all leave at the same time, and it can be an interesting way to measure things. In a business context, seasonality is a common cohort creator. You might think of an airline. They might have very different behavior and lifetime value associated with a cohort of heavy business travel time versus a cohort who bought tickets for the holiday time frame. I would guess that business travelers are going to be more frequent repeat visitors and probably stick to weekday flights, while Christmas visitors might not travel again until that time next year and probably prefer weekends. Now, if this analysis turns out to be correct, you could plan campaigns and promotions and content around that as well as the segments. So we also see, if we scroll down here, we've got user retention and lifetime value. And although I mentioned above we have more returning users in total, this is a pretty long tail here in terms of many people who do not return for a second visit. That tells me that the ones who do return tend to keep returning. So you either love this game or you never play it a second time, I guess. We're going to look in more detail in the Analysis Hub later, but for this cohort reporting, I actually want to skip over here to one of their pre-built reports. So I'm going to go down here to Analysis, the template gallery, and they've got an entire one here on cohort analysis that lets us dive in a little bit deeper. So here we can see the week that people started, so 4 weeks ago, and then we can see each week after that how many of them remain. So 4 weeks ago we would have 4 weeks of data, and 1 week ago we'd have 1 week of data, hence the waterfall here. And we'll get into all these config settings later in the Analysis Hub, but as you can see here, we can change just about everything. We can change the segments, which is always useful. We can change the return criteria, the granularity here from weekly to daily or monthly, and even what value we're looking to measure. So we're looking right now at active users, but we could look at something like user engagement instead. So for example, we would come over here and scroll through here, find user engagement, apply that one, and it now becomes an option, and I can change my metric from active users to user engagement. The other thing I want to look at, this is a total sum. You may want to look at this in terms of per user, and we can see what happens on a per user basis as time goes on. We see a big drop right away, and then things even out a bit. One thing that might be interesting to look at would be ad revenue or in-app purchases as well. And perhaps you lose users, but as the levels get harder, the people who are still there might choose to buy the power-ups to keep advancing in the game. Who knows? There's all kinds of interesting analysis, and it's all here for the slicing and dicing. In order to better serve your customers and prospects, it's important to understand who they are. We can think about our analysis of our users in terms of who they are, what they're doing, observable behavior, and what they're trying to accomplish, intent. We spend a lot of time on observed behavior in GA, but in marketing analytics overall, we're often interested in demographics, and we have a section dedicated to that here in Google Analytics that's going to address that who, what, where, and some interests as well. Now, this is unique because it's one of the only reports where extra data is brought in to supplement your reports, and it's not generated by your site or your app. This is because Google actually already knows a lot about your visitors from their own internal analytics, especially those that have accounts with logins like Gmail, Android, Chrome, YouTube, Google Meet, Google Docs, and so on. Now, for that reason, Google is particularly well suited to provide you with some extra background information on your users. From a privacy point of view, of course, all this data is anonymized and aggregated. It's only provided if there are lots of users in the segment, so no personally identifiable information is ever inadvertently shared. Okay, we're here in the demographics overview, and it's going to give us some information about the most pressing concerns, including where geographically are my users from. So this is going to include by country, here we see, by city, and even the real-time report here of who is on the site at this moment. We scroll down here, we're going to see some gender information, some age cohorts, and then that interest category that I find really, interesting. Okay, let's go over here into the demographic details report so we can examine these a bit closer. And we're essentially going to see that same information but broken out. So we'll start here with country again. And it's pretty clear that our user base is dominated by two geographies here, the US and India. Since we're talking about demographics, let's throw on a secondary dimension of gender. Now, we won't always have this data, so you will see some fields in here that say unknown. Now, what's interesting here is the US identified females are actually higher than the US males, but in India, it's the opposite. Out of some 13,000 users here, we only have about 840 that are Indian female. Let's change this and look at language. Now, despite the heavy international use, the overwhelming majority here have English set as the primary language of their phone or their browser, Spanish coming in a bit second. Let's go ahead and look at age. So we have a very large group of users here in this kind of 18 up to 34 range. The two largest by far, and then continues on up from there at 35. So it skews very much younger. But what about if we change to something else here? What if we sort for average engagement time? So we see a huge shift here. Those groups heading all the way down to the bottom, 18 to 24 is literally down here at the bottom with just 8 minutes. And then at the top, we have 5 times that amount up here. So it looks like the retirees really love this game, as the top groups here are all of the oldest groups. Interesting to know, especially when we, again, think about quantity versus quality as two different types of metrics. Okay, let's switch directions completely and look at the interest groups for a moment. Okay, so again, this data, it comes from Google's data, the browsing and content interaction clues that they have on various users. And what we're really looking for here is called lookalike modeling. If I can find a really engaged or a profitable subset or segment of my users who all share a common interest, then it stands to reason I should try to market and advertise my site or app to that group of users, because chances are they're the type of people who will respond as they share traits with my best users. So if there's any in that group who haven't yet heard about my app, I want to make sure they hear about it. So if that's the case, then I'm really not as interested in these quantity metrics here over on the user side, right? So if I search by users, which is how this is going to come up in default, I'm not as interested in these quantity metrics. And assuming that more time in the app equates to more ad revenue, I'm still interested in that engagement time. So again, looking at which ones bring the most users here is how you're going to see it when you first come default, but I'm going to move it over to average engagement time. Now, I'm going to see a whole different set of interests popping up here. And so it's worth diving in more there and doing some segmentation to learn more about those visitors and whether or not I should look into marketing to them directly to reach more of those high potential users. So as you can see, by leveraging Google's user graph and combining it with our account data, we can learn much more about our visitors than we otherwise could. For those of us operating website and apps, the type of devices, operating systems, and platforms that our users are using is a big part of understanding their experience and thus a focus of our analytics. So when we go to the tech reports, we're going to see the same template as we did in demographics. We've got the overview and then the breakout for each of those in the details report. And because Google has the ability to see a single user across multiple devices, a really interesting report is this first one here, users by platform. It not only shows you the volume of who is on which platform that makes up all the data in your account, the size of the circle here being more people, but the overlap of the Venn diagram is how many users are on both platforms as they access your site. This is known as cross-device tracking. So in this case, there are people who access your content via web and app, and some who even access via both Android and iOS, which, to be honest, kind of surprised me. Now, this can also happen if you supply a user ID to Google Analytics when they log into your platform. So whether you use Google Signals automatically or whether you supply your own user ID, you can get this cross-device tracking. Okay, so when we look at the demo account here on the Google Merchandise Store, the Venn looks very different. It's a web-only property here, so I'm not surprised to see only web. But we can break this down by operating system and by browser and by desktop versus tablet versus mobile web. And down here, screen resolution is always interesting to think about as we think about how we design our site. Now, just because you're at work and you've got your monster 32-inch monitor, it doesn't mean everyone around the world is viewing your site in the same way. We can use this data to help understand our visitors. Now, let's go and look at this data for the Flooded app. It's always kind of interesting to compare these two. So being primarily a mobile app-based game, it doesn't surprise me to see this Venn look very different. We saw earlier in the demographics that Indian males on Android are the dominant user, so it makes sense that it's reflected here with the big Android circle. And what about cross-device? we see no overlap. Apparently, no one plays the game on Android and then picks up their iOS device to play it again with that device. So I guess that shouldn't totally surprise us. I was curious about the web. Is that mobile app or desktop web? And it's clear from the platform by device report here that the web is essentially all desktop. We see 1.2K of web desktop, but only 148 on the mobile web. Now, the screen resolution report down here is also interesting. Despite mobile apps representing 90% of the usage, so why would the top resolution be what I think is an HD computer monitor? 1920 by 1080 is HD resolution. I think the answer is because Android is the largest mobile platform, and there are a ton of different resolutions for those devices. So while they together add up to be more, there's a long tail, and any one resolution doesn't rise to the top above a standard computer monitor. Or it could be that it's not a monitor. Maybe it's a phone that just has an HD resolution. Let's dive into the details here and see if we can figure that out. So by default, we're going to be here by browser. That's not what I'm interested in the moment. I wanted to figure out this resolution. So we go down here as a primary dimension to screen resolution, and we see that top one again. Again, I want to break that out into its parts, and so I'm going to go over here to device and then to platform as a secondary dimension. And then let's just clean it up a little bit and put 1080 up here in the filter so that we only see those. And here we have our answer. No, every HD resolution appears to be a computer and not mobile. Okay, so you can see here we can really get a sense for how our users are consuming our content from a tech and device perspective. It can be really useful. I think this is a must-see video. In some ways, I feel like everything we have done to this point is just to prepare you to be unleashed on the Explore tool. Now, we mentioned earlier that G4 was less about predefined standard reports. And now that the reports we've analyzed so far haven't been useful, but they're also to serve to explain the various elements, the primary dimensions, the secondary dimensions, the metrics, the audiences, the filters, and so on, because once we get used to and familiar with those things, we can go in knowing exactly the report we want to build in order to answer our analysis questions because we know all of those elements. And for that, we can use the ultimate power tool, the Explore tool, previously known as the Analysis Hub. Now, at first, I thought this was too complex and custom for an Essentials class. Maybe it is, but I just can't let you go without at least showing you this tool because it is so versatile. So when we first jump in here, we can see that there are some different templates around here and some pre-shared, pre-built analysis, but we're just going to dive right in here with a blank one. And previously we looked at this tech report that talked about the devices and resolutions and so on. Let's kind of recreate that here. So we're here in our exploration space. On the left, we have our available segments, dimensions, metrics, and then some of how we're going to visualize those things. And on the right is just our free canvas, and it's a little intimidating right now, but that's why we want to practice with one report we're already familiar with. So I think what we did first was to segment by the area, right? So the first thing I want to do is add a metric on here. We want to get US traffic. So the first thing that I need to do is just get traffic. So let's go ahead and come down here. We can look at the users, and we see one of those here is active users. Okay, that's where we're going to start, is with our active users. Okay, so we have our active users here as an available metric. We're going to go ahead and drop that into our report down here under the metrics, and we see we have almost 100,000 active users. Now, again, let's say in this case, I just want US traffic. So we're going to go ahead and collect that. Now, we come here, there are some various user segments, session segments, event segments, and some templates. So actually, let's go down here to template because this would be a common one. We click on demographics and we see that country ID is one of the things we can segment the users by. So let's go ahead and click add filter, contains, US is the first one in our data set, and we apply that. So now we have the ability to do so. Let's make sure we name this so it's easy to see. And then we go ahead, save and apply. And now we see our segment comparison contains US. Now this is going to drop us down quite a bit. We went from having 100,000 down to 40,000 active users here. Okay, so again, looking through here, we've got our segment. We could change the way we pivot, but for now, that's not going to mean too much. What we need here are some rows. Okay, what did I want to see from these users? Well, I wanted to see what their resolution was. So let's go here and grab a dimension. Come down to, I think that's a platform device. And there it is, screen resolution. So we go ahead and import that one. Now it's available, and we're going to go ahead and drag it in here as a row. Okay, we're starting to see the beginnings of a report here. I've got the various different resolutions, and then I've got the US active users who have each of those resolutions. Now, before I wanted to filter that for just the 1080 variants, the HD variants. So let's go ahead down here and let's put in a filter. And we are going to filter on screen resolution. We want that to contain 1080. Now, again, it's going to grab some of my data down there, but I'm just going to leave this as a blank 1080 and grab anything that has 1080 in it. Okay, and we see quite a bit of variance with 1080. Of course, the most common one here being the standard HD resolution, but it's interesting to see that it's not the only variation with 1080 in it. Okay, so now, this is pretty complicated. We moved through this. It might be actually worth watching this one more time if you want to make sure you capture everything there. But the point was to show you that we can recreate this entire report here in the Explore tool in just a few clicks. And this is just one example, but hopefully it's illustrative of the power of this tool. For me, if I know there's already a predefined report that answers exactly what I want, I'll go there. But most of the time, I just start here because I know that with a few clicks, I can have exactly what I want, and I can have much more flexibility to modify it and customize it to get exactly what I need. Pathing has been much improved for GA4. Now, it has a similar look to the behavior flow reports in the previous version. It kept those Sankey diagrams that are so intuitive and visually appealing, but the underlying functionality is much improved. One of the biggest problems of the previous version is that they were quite slow, but also that they only used a tiny fraction of the actual data in your account, a process known as sampling. Now, this means that the data you saw was often simply just wrong. And as I always say, false information you're relying on is worse than no information. So they could also only show a handful of paths. So again, it wasn't really accurate in terms of what it was showing versus what was actually happening on your site. These new reports are also able to be segmented. And as you've heard me say now many times, the ability to drill down into similar users rather than viewing everyone as one huge monolithic blob is the first step in real analysis. So again, we can start here with some of the templates here in the exploration tool, but I'm going to show you how easy it is just to start with a brand new blank slate here. So we go into the Explore tool, we click blank, and then we're going to change the technique down here from freeform to path exploration. Okay, so we're going to launch here. Not too bad. We start with the various events, and everything is event driven. It makes sense to go from the first event, which of course we know is session start, and then the various events that follow from that. We have some page views here, and they go on. Now, of course, we can click into each one of these, and it's going to change the way the diagram looks. But sometimes I find it's more useful to go here from event name in step one, and instead change that to be page title or screen name. It just helps me understand how people are progressing through the various screens or pages on the site. So I can see they went to the home page or the store or the Chrome Dino collectible figurines page. Another thing that we can do is change how each of these are broken down. So we talked about device category before. We can go ahead and do that again here. Type in device, and here we go, device category. So I'll go ahead and import that in as a dimension, and then we'll drag that over to our breakdown. And that's what happens when I can hold my mouse over each of these, and it's going to give me not only how people progress to those pages, but the people who did so, how were they broken down by their various device category, desktop, mobile, tablet, and so on. Now, what I could do is come down here and filter. If I wanted specifically to figure out how mobile users were working, I could filter on a particular device category, but we'll go ahead and leave it for now. Another thing we can do is as we step through each of these, we can come up here and we can limit the nodes that we're going to get for each one. I've got a lot of data here, so it takes a little while. We can limit rephrase. We can limit the options that we see for each of these nodes if you have too many, or if you want to make sure you include some that were not being included before, you can go ahead and check these on and off, which will indicate which of these nodes you're going to see. That way you get the visualization that you're looking for, answer the question you want, and you can strip out some of the extraneous or make sure certain things get included. There's a lot of flexibility we have with this. For the most part, you've seen how easy it is to recreate the paths. And from here, I think you can see how each of these folks progress. But the other thing I think is really interesting to do here is a reverse path. It's to start somewhere and say, where do people come from to get here? So for example, we go to shopping cart, we start over here, and we're going to start at an ending point. And the ending point that we want here is going to be the shopping cart. And then we figure out how people go backwards from there. So for example, we talked about the Dino dark mode before. We can click on this and understand people come in, they purchase. Previous to that, they were coming either from search results, so people were coming specifically looking, or they were looking at the overall merchandise store around Chrome Dino, and so on. Another quick thing we can change here is the values. And this is the event count, which makes sense for some case, especially in apps. But if I'm looking at a website here, I might want to change this to just be active users. I want to see how many users are moving through this funnel, not just how many events are counted. So change this to be active users, and now I can have this exact same analysis, but it's users moving through the path. Okay, so that's two different ways to do funnel analysis, forward and reverse. I think it's pretty intuitive, and it is drastically improved. In addition to pathing analysis, another one of the drastically improved features of GA4 is traditional funnel analysis. It is much better. Previous versions of Google Analytics funnels were really inflexible. They really only worked if your site just happened to line up exactly to how they were designed to work, and most of it didn't. Now, the new version pulls in features that were previously only available in the enterprise version of GA. It's actually even a little bit better. So for now, for free, you're going to get a better funnel analysis tool than you get in the six-figure enterprise product. Now, the primary benefit here is you can build the funnels any way you like, from page views, from events, from conversions, and you can do it all retroactively. So before, you had to guess ahead of time what the path would be. You build the funnel, and only then would it start collecting data, hopefully, if you've guessed right on the user behavior. Otherwise, it'd be lost, and you'd have to start all over again. So let's actually build one from scratch. Now, you can take some of these templates here, but again, we're just going to build one right from blank, as I'm going to show you how easy it will be. Now, we're going to come up here and change our technique down here to funnel exploration, and that's going to set us up. From here, our visualization, we can do a standard funnel or a trended funnel. We're going to do standard, but a trended is kind of interesting because you can show you for each of these steps how things are trending over time. So you can see if there are particular times where people are getting stuck on one part of the funnel. And then you can also decide whether or not to make it an open funnel. An open funnel just means that someone can enter from these steps at any point. They don't have to start all the way at the top and work their way through. So if you're just going to go through a checkout process, that's usually a closed funnel. But other things, contacts, forms, you may be able to come in from different areas. So that might make sense to make it an open funnel. And then, of course, we can segment the funnel as well. Super useful to understand how different segments are going through your path. And the main thing here we want to do, of course, in a funnel is look at steps. And so we're going to build this out. In my case, the first step I want to come through here is to begin checkout. So I'm going to name this begin checkout. And we can do this through pages or events or however you want to step it through. In our case, I have an event that's going to fire called begin checkout. So that's what we're going to put in. And then you can have the next step. Now, you can say whether this is indirectly followed by or directly followed by. In our case, it doesn't matter. You're going through, don't have much choice, but you may want to determine that. So here, next step for us is going to be, you can enter billing or shipping info. Now notice I said or. We're going to put the condition down here to be or, so I can enter my payment info, or I can add the shipping info. So again, I'm just going to search here for an event called Add Shipping Info. Again, it's specific to my cart. Yours may look different, however your site fires. The next step for us is going to be to review the order. So again, I'll give it a name, and the condition down here is I've got an event that's going to fire called Review Order. And the last step here, which is a purchase. So again, I'm going to go ahead and name this Purchase. And we have an event that's going to fire that lets us know a purchase was complete. And we're done. Now, a few things here. We're complete with this, so we could go ahead and apply that. We have a summary here of what it would look like so far. It's also interesting to see that you can have time limits on these. So you must enter these steps within a certain amount of time. Again, in a checkout, that may not be necessary, but where you're trying to track whether people do certain things in a certain order, the timing may matter. So I'm going to go ahead here and click Apply. And there you've got it. You've got a basic funnel here. We can see each step in the funnel. We can see how many users we're losing in each step of the funnel. And I can see the completion rates as we go through, the abandon rates for each one. I've got a table down here that summarizes everything for me. A few more things I want to add on here. The first thing I want to do is do a breakdown of this by device category. So I'm going to go up here and add a dimension. Again, we put in device category. And we can have a breakdown here of device category. And this is going to show for each stage how many of those devices I have moving through, and then the completion rate, the abandonments, and so on per device. This gives me an idea to see if certain kinds of devices are struggling to get from one step to the other. We might have a breakdown or a bug in the site for a particular device, and this can be really useful to find that. I also want to show the elapsed time down here. I think that's a really cool feature. It helps us understand a consumer's journey. How long does each step take to progress? Yeah, we have clients actually in the automotive industry. There's an entire discussion around how long someone's consideration set is from the time they come on site and enter the funnel to the time they actually take a test drive. Lots of discussion and debate. Well, this is the kind of data that can really help us solve that exact question. We don't have to guess anymore. I also like this one down here for next action. We can understand, as you drop out of the funnel and go over, it's going to help us hover and understand where each should go for there. And we can see where people are heading outside of the funnel. So that's it. In just a few short minutes, we were able to construct this funnel with quite a few features. It's retroactive in time. It follows our user all the way through, and it's segmentable. So I think these funnels are incredibly powerful. I encourage you to add a few for whatever flows you're tracking for your users. One quick tip, and if you just created a new one, it's enabled by default now, so we'll just double check that it is, but if you have an older one, we'll want to check that as well. When we're here in the events, you see some of these events, such as page view, and that one, of course, we know is how we track all of our pages. But we also see these like scroll. We can actually track scroll via events. This is done automatically through something called enhanced measurement. If we come down here to the admin section, and then for your property, we want to look at the data stream. And then we're going to click into the data stream settings itself, and you should see this part here for an enhanced measurement. And this is pretty cool. It's enabled here now, and if you click into it, it'll show you what it does. Of course, we're going to track page views. That's what Google Analytics does. But it can also automatically track things like scrolls. Now, previously, we had to go through a lot of work to try to track scrolls, and it didn't really work very well. Now it's done automatically. Those events get sent there, and you can enable or disable it here. Same thing with outbound clicks. When somebody clicks a link that goes outside of your site, you want to track what they're clicking and where it goes. Before, there were a lot of race conditions and things you had to do. Now that's just done automatically. Another handy one here is site search. This is not a Google search. This is when actually someone uses the site search functionality on your site. It'll automatically track and grab those parameters and pull them in so you can understand what people are searching on from which pages and where they're going. Also, video engagement. So when you have embedded videos on your site, you can capture the video play, progress, and so on. And then lastly, file downloads. So if somebody is going to download a PDF, for example, we want to be able to track that happens because we're not running the Google Analytics code on that file itself. So again, I think these are all fantastic. I suggest you enable them and keep them there, but just a quick tip in case you don't have that. As we've said a few times in this course, we want to be able to track not just the quantity of traffic, but the quality of traffic. That campaign I spent all that money on, it brought lots of visitors, but did they actually do anything I wanted them to do? If you want to find that incredibly valuable audience so you can do lookalike modeling, you need to have a way of evaluating what those good outcomes are. And that way is either through e-commerce transactions, ad revenue, or simple goal conversions. You don't have to have an e-commerce site. You could have a form submit. You could have a download of a white paper, whatever it is. We want to mark that as a goal conversion. As we see here in this traffic acquisition report, I can see the different ways that traffic is coming to my site. And what I want to be able to do is simply understand whether or not that traffic is converting. So I've sorted by conversions here, and you can see that that's going to change us to conversions up here. This is the type of analysis I want to be able to do. The beauty of Google Analytics 4 is I can make just about anything a goal conversion. And if I don't have the one I need, I can often just use other events, or I can create them to trigger the ones that I want, and then I use those as conversions. And that's exactly what I'm going to demonstrate here today. So first, let's head down to our list of events. Now, I've got a whole bunch of events here because of the shopping cart, but let's go to a simpler one that's probably going to look like what you've got, the ones we created the other day. So again, I'm going to come down here to the list of events. These are going to be the automatic events that come in by Google Analytics. So the first visit, page view that fires every time a page gets viewed, scroll every time someone scrolls, session start every time a session begins. If I mark these as conversions, that's not going to be good. That means every time that someone views a page, it's now going to get marked as a conversion. That's probably not what we want. Now, I can send a specific event in here by updating my site and the page, but that's tough. I have to actually go in and make code changes. Or I can do it a different way. I can actually create events from these events with specific conditions. And that's one thing we're going to do here today. So the first thing we need to do is create a custom event name. So I'm going to say form submit complete. And what I'm doing here is I'm coming down here and I'm going to look for a page location. Page location contains form complete. I'm actually going to copy this event name before I leave. And so anytime we come across a page location that fires that event and the value of that location is form complete, then we'll have this particular event fired. Okay, so that's all we need to do there. And we're going to piggyback on this one that already exists. So now every time a page view fires, we're going to look and see if that page location is form complete. And if so, we're going to fire this other event. So now what we need to do is come up here to conversions, create a new conversion event. We're going to call this the same thing, form submit complete, and save that. So now we have a new conversion event. Every time that this event gets fired, form submit complete, which is what we just set up, then we will record a conversion event. Really simple. One thing to note, if I come down here to events, I don't see that one in my list of events yet. It can take up to 24 hours for that to appear. And once it does, you actually don't have to create this conversion event. You could just come over here and check mark as a conversion. But I wanted to show you the other way so that you can start recording those conversions immediately. And that'll work so long as you keep the event name exactly the same as the conversion name. So that's how we can use one event to spawn another, and how we can use the condition matching to create a conversion event so that we can track good traffic from bad. Getting data and insights into the hands of the right people in your org is critical. And it may be as simple as giving those people who need information access to Google Analytics so they can log in and get the data they need on their own. So now that you've set up your account, it's time to share with others, and let's make sure you're doing so with security in mind. Come on down here to the admin section, and we're going to manage users from the aptly named user management section. Now, this appears in two places here, at the account level and the property level, and it inherits from the account down to the properties. So changes we make here at the top are going to inherit down. I'll show you what we mean by that. I'm going to come in here, click Add Users, and I'll add Dave Booth, co-founder, collaborator. And we can decide whether or not to notify the user by email. I won't give them any email. And we have the permissions down here. There's 4 levels of permissions. Edit, which can manage the account for essentially everything except for adding and removing users. They can add, edit, delete, not just the settings of the properties, but the properties themselves. So be a bit careful with this one. The only catch here is that you do need edit in order to create an audience, which I think is kind of odd, but that's the way it is. And edit will include collaborate automatically. So as soon as you check this, it'll check collaborate and you can't uncheck that. The next one down here, collaborate, is probably the most common for someone who's just a user and is not actually configuring. You can collaborate on shared assets, such as a funnel visualization. And then read and analyze is fairly restrictive, but you can still view and filter reports and do basic analysis. They can create their own assets, but not actually collaborate on shared assets. And lastly, down here, we have user management, where you can add, delete users and their permissions. Now, note that this is pretty powerful, but it doesn't actually automatically include edit or collaborate unless it's specifically given, or unless this person decides to give it to themselves, which is totally possible. Okay, so for Dave, we're going to give him collaborate on the account level. And in fact, I saw that I had user permissions there. I don't want to do that either. So we just have standard kind of collaborate, and then we'll go down to the property itself. Now this is going to inherit down through here. And if we go to property user management, we'll see that he showed up here with collaborate, read, and analyze. And if we want to, we can edit that directly. So I can give him edit to this particular property and save that, so that we see that he has edit access to this particular property. But if I go back to the account, we see that he does not have edit access there. So you can go in and specifically override the inheriting by editing a property directly. Okay, so user permissions are fairly straightforward, but give some thought to who might need which type of access before you tackle this overlooked but pretty important task. We've covered a lot here, and I hope you not only have a solid foundation to work from, but desire to learn more and continue to delve into this fascinating topic of digital marketing. As believe it or not, we've just scratched the surface of what's possible. I would highly recommend my Google Tag Manager course if you're not yet familiar. That product was designed from the ground up by Google to make managing GA easier, and it's incredibly powerful. We just touched ever so slightly on attribution, but it's a fascinating topic. And if you want to understand how all of your marketing is affecting your conversions, not just your site and apps, my introduction to attribution and mix modeling is really a course about helping you understand the performance of all of your marketing on and off your site. And while it's not strictly necessary, if you want to take your analytics tracking to the next level, this is all built on JavaScript, and having a background there is really valuable. And finally, if you want to put your knowledge to the test, Google offers a Google Analytics individual qualification exam for those who'd like to demonstrate that proficiency. Now, this course is not designed to teach you that test, but you will have a major leg up on your studies now if you've watched this. If you have any questions, if you'd like to see any topic covered, or if you just want to reach out and say hello, you can find me on Twitter. My ID is just my last name, @Koberg. I really do appreciate hearing from people. Thanks so much, and happy analyzing.